In this screencast, I'm going to demonstrate a workflow I made in the Workflow iOS app to send an OmniFocus task to Trello. I'll briefly demonstrate it and then go into the details of how it works. I'm in OmniFocus on my iPad and I have a task open, so I'll tap the Share button, Run Workflow, OmniFocus Task to Trello. We'll put it in the Doing list, open Trello, and you can see it added to the list. Before I step through the workflow in detail, I just want to point out a couple of things about the OmniFocus task. It has a due date, and there's also a URL in the note, and we'll see how these things are handled in a few minutes. So let's go through the details of how it works. You need 4 apps in order for this to work. OmniFocus, Trello, and Workflow, and also Pythonista, because part of the processing is done with a Python script via Workflow's run script action. For this part of the demo, I've made a second debug version of the workflow that includes some quick look actions, and I've also renamed some of the variables to make the demo easier to follow. So I'll step through this debug version now and we can see what happens at each step. So let me go back to OmniFocus, tap Share, Run Workflow, and this time I'm going to run the debug version. The first thing that Workflow does is get the list of URLs passed to it by OmniFocus, and I've inserted a quick look action so that we can inspect them. The first URL is the URL from the note. Second is the task's full URL, which includes the task name, note, and due date. I'll call this the long URL during the demo. And finally, we have a shorter version of the task URL, which is just the link to the OmniFocus task without all of that extra information. I'll call this the short URL. So the first piece of data we need to get is the second URL, the long one with all of the task information. So I know from trial and error that this long URL is the next to last item in the list of URLs passed in by OmniFocus. So the next few steps are just going to count the items in that list and then subtract 1 to give us the position of the long URL. And in this case we have 3 items, so the long URL is at index or position 2. So next the workflow is just going to use a get item from list action to get the item at index 2, which is our long URL. Now we need the short URL, and I know again from some trial and error that the short URL is always the last URL in the list passed in by OmniFocus. So again we'll use get item from list and just get the last item, and it's the short URL. So next workflow is going to pass the long URL to the Python script using the run script action. And the Python script does a couple of things. First, it parses the task name, task note, and due date from the long URL, and then it replaces the URL encoded characters with human readable characters. So instead of this, you get this. Now, why did I use Python? Could this be accomplished with a combination of match text and URL encode actions and workflow? It probably could be, but I already knew how to do it in Python, and with Workflow's Pythonista actions, it's easy to pass the input to a Python script. It's also a lot easier, for me at least, to debug a Python script than it is to debug a workflow. So the script is going to extract that information we need from the long URL and store it in a Python dictionary, which is just a set of key value pairs. So the dictionary is then going to be converted to a JSON string. Now if you don't know what JSON is, it stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and basically it's a format for storing structured data as human readable text. So instead of trying to pass a Python object back to Workflow, which wouldn't work, we can just pass plain text. And Workflow knows what to do with plain text. Finally, the script is going to copy the JSON string to the clipboard and then open OmniFocus so that the workflow can continue running. So let's let it run that script now. We're back in workflow, and workflow is going to get the contents of the clipboard and then use a get dictionary from input action to read those clipboard contents, which, since it's a JSON string, it recognizes as a dictionary. And this is what it looks like. You have three key value pairs: name, due date, and note are the keys, and then the information from the task are the values. So then, using the keys, we can get the individual values from the dictionary and extract that task information from it. So we'll continue running, and here's the task name. Here's the note, which I've also appended the short URL to. You can see at the very bottom. Here's the due date, today at 7 p.m. So finally, it's going to add the task to Trello. So we'll select the doing list again, open Trello, and the card is added to the list. So now that we've been through this and we know how it gets processed in workflow, I want to point out how the task information was added to the card. So record screencast is our task name, and that becomes the name of the card. And then you can see the note here, which becomes the description of the card, and it also includes the OmniFocus task URL, that short URL. And then it also includes the due date from the task. So all of that information from the OmniFocus task has now been added to our Trello card. So now that we've been through that, the last thing I'm going to do is show you how to download the Python script and configure Pythonista to run it. So if you go to the URL that's shown on your screen now, it will take you to a snippet in my Bitbucket account which contains the Python script. I have it open here in Safari on my iPad, so you just want to select everything and copy it. Now open Pythonista. If your screen doesn't have the new file button, just tap the menu there and tap plus. Now you want to tap empty script, call it process OmniFocus task with dashes .py, just like that. Tap create. Now paste, and that's it. So once you have the Python script in Pythonista and once you've installed the workflow, you're ready to go. So hopefully you find this useful, and thanks for watching.